24 minutes before 11 o'clock. You know what I would like to see one day? I would like to see no more wars. I would like to see no more wars. There's nothing more heartbreaking than to see a young person, and you can't these days just say young man anymore because there are plenty of young women in our military forces. But there's nothing more heartbreaking to see some young, promising person with a whole future ahead of them, and they have decided to put their lives on the line for the sake of our freedom and our security and whatever else you want to put in there. But they do this for us, and I am absolutely certain that is pretty much the bottom line for them. And then they come back. Sometimes with nothing physically noticeable, but maybe the post-traumatic stress disorder you hear so much about, PTSD. And, you know, we've heard, there was a story the other day that Jacqueline Kennedy probably had PTSD after the Kennedy assassination, which would make sense.
Yes.
You know, with what she saw. How come I don't hear you?
It would make total sense.
Somebody who has really studied this in such a very personal way, Caroline Alexander is on the phone. The cover story of the February issue of National Geographic is her story. It's called The Invisible War on the Brain. Caroline Alexander has, I didn't say Caroline Kennedy earlier, did I?
No.
Caroline Alexander has been contributing to National Geographic for a while, I guess. She's a journalist and a writer of a number of documentary films, most recently Tiger. Mm-hmm. And she's a translator, actually, for the new translation of Homer's The Iliad. Holy mackerel.
That is pretty awesome.
Mackerel.
How impressive.
Oh, gosh. I think I'm out of my league here. Caroline Alexander. Good morning, Caroline.
Hi, good morning.
Where are you right now?
Right now I'm in sunny Maine.
In Maine. Okay. Well, thank you for being on the air with us. So did you actually did you embed yourself, as they say, with the soldiers?
I did not, no, I was not remotely in field or in combat. This story emerged because I had been, I do a lot of historical back work, and I had been doing a great deal of research about World War I, which just fascinates me, and was fixated on the phenomenon of shell shock. And so I had been sort of immersed in all of this literature about this strange affliction of 100 years ago, which people could never figure out if it was psychological or if it was physiological. In other words, was this a nervous disorder, as they called it then, or had something happened to the brain from the close exposure to exploding shells and the force that might represent on the brain. And while I was writing this, or just finishing that story, the news headlines started coming in. You know, we're talking about 2003, 2004, 2005, and I was so struck by the reporting at that time of a strange new affliction in the military amongst soldiers that appeared to be PTSD, but appeared to be something different. And as soon as I saw that, it put both shell shock and the modern affliction into very close focus. And I thought it can't be a coincidence that both these wars have been the mechanism of injury, the signature mechanism of injury has been explosive force. And so I sort of followed the story from a distance, and then it came to a point where I thought, there's a lot the public needs to understand. It's a very baffling situation. We don't understand blast. We don't understand the brain. We don't quite understand what happens to the brain, what's going on. And so the story represents an attempt to give civilians, if you will, as well as military, a kind of concise overview of the state of knowledge.
Well, I think one way that we as America, we as people in general, the whole world, we have benefited by allowing ourselves to understand that this is a real and true affliction. You mentioned shell shock. I remember in my dad's day, he was a World War II vet. They called it battle fatigue. And I don't know if it's one and the same thing. I don't know if it's from witnessing horrific things or, as you say, being close enough to an explosion to actually be physically shaken by it. But I guess either way, if you come back differently than you went, and not in a good way differently, then there must be something. If it happens to almost every soldier that goes through this.
Yes, then we have a duty to follow up.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What appears to be the case with the current traumatic brain injury, which many of the neurologists I spoke for strongly advocate now a different terminology. Traumatic brain injury is the term that you would find on any website that would refer to blunt force trauma, kind of thing you get in a car accident if your head hit the windshield, or in a sports injury like we're seeing in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
But what the neurologists are pointing out is that blast does something different. And the term they would like to use is something like blast-induced neurotrauma to make sure that people understand this is in a distinct category. And the theories as to what happened range at the moment quite widely. I spoke to the sort of highest level neurologists in the country. They're working on, dozens of different approaches, and none of them kind of overlap, which is a very kind of
Really?
Telling sign of how
So, okay, so I have a question. If I were in a factory, let's say, and there was an explosion, I'm not witnessing people being horrible to other people. It's just an explosion. It's an accident. But let's say it's the same exact force of explosion as on the battlefield, where I am experiencing. First of all, I could be fearful for my life. Even before the explosion, I could be witnessing horrific things. Is the damage, is the person after the fact, in both cases, going through the same experience, or does the one on the battlefield have something different because of the battle itself and the very nature of what war is about?
The experience now seems we are able to tease it out and say that it is a physiological act of brain damage, which is very different from post-traumatic stress disorder, from seeing an event that gives you physical emotional suffering. PTSD, definitely, if you could look at the brain of someone who's suffering, there are altered states. So many people quite rightly point out that even, there's no such thing as an emotional state or emotional trauma that isn't ultimately rooted in the brain. But that said, what blast force injury does is inflict some kind of damage, quite often on the frontal lobe, which is the part of the brain that controls your executive functions, your ability to make correct decisions, your ability to act appropriately, and your impulse control center. And so one very chilling possibility, yet to be properly examined, but certainly, on the table now, is that the high rate of suicides amongst the military of these campaigns might be related to this brain damage on the frontal lobe. And I can give you a very good, the case study that brought all this into focus was a study of breachers. And those are the guys who use explosives in the military offensively. They're like the Navy SEALs who blast the hole into Osama bin Laden's compound.
Right.
They are highly skilled, they're highly practiced, they're not, they're not necessarily. The study that was done in the United States,
right.
not even in the field. And after 2 weeks of training, those instructors who had spent 2 weeks setting low-level controlled explosive devices with no PTSD, no trauma, showed significant neurological decline. And that indicated, that's when everything kind of jumped into focus in 2008, that even exposure to low-level blasts, nobody got knocked down and nobody thought they had been injured, but it is doing something either through the pressure wave or how that blast shock wave hits your body is doing something to you that we are still trying to understand.
Oh, my goodness. We need to take a little break, and I hate to do this, but because I know Robin has some questions, too, so I apologize to Robin as well. Caroline Alexander, just hang in there a little bit. We'll be right back. And listeners, if you want to call in, you're welcome to as well. 622-9622. We'll be right back.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. It'll turn out mostly cloudy today and breezy. It'll be warm, too, with a couple of showers or even a thunderstorm later this afternoon, high 76 to 80. tonight, cloudy, breezy, and mild with a shower or a thunderstorm, low 63 to 67. Tomorrow, cloud and a shower to start, then some sun in the afternoon, breezy and cooler with highs in the 60s. For Sunday, sunshine, high 62 to 66. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Joe Lundberg.
Ooh, a xylophone. Sounds dreamy.
Yeah, they don't make them like this anymore, Robin. I'm shipping it to the Musical Historical Society.
And you're packing it like that?
What, this won't work?
Why don't you take it to the Personal Service Center at the corner of Northeast 25th Avenue and 24th Street in Ocala? Just look for the yellow signs.
Great idea. That'll save me a lot of time.
The passing of time.
Personal Service Center makes sending packages easy.
And quick, call 789-6683.
For the Personal Service Center.
Your home is safe, or is it? AA Lock, Dock, and Security. The name has been a staple in Ocala since 1985. Do you have the right equipment in place to have peace of mind when you are at home or away? AA Lock, Dock, and Security has the right people to install and monitor your home or business. Call today for a free on-site security analysis. Call 867-1965. AA Lock, Dock, and Security, 219 Northwest 10th Street, 867-1965.
All right, 12 minutes before 11 o'clock. Thank you for staying tuned. If you get the February issue of National Geographic magazine, you'll see that the cover story is titled The Invisible War on the Brain. Caroline Alexander is the writer of that article and is on the phone with us right now. I know you have some questions, Robin. I'm sorry.
One of the things about the Breacher study that stood out in my mind on the whole article that you had written was the resistance from the people in the Pentagon as to the validity of this study, as to, that this could be the real reason. It just was really amazing to me that at first the powers that be didn't accept this as truth.
It's, I think that, that's very sort of disconcerting. I think we must, in this particular case, I think, it's too quick to kind of point the finger only at them. What is most, what is even more disturbing to me is that the medical community at large, the civilian medical as well as the military medical community, are just utterly baffled by this phenomena. And what I find, but the sort of the point that I would like to make, because I think history is in this case very instructive, is, after the First World War, after the Great War, one of the most traumatic military campaigns ever in human history, the signature injury of that war was shell shock. And yet, I grew up as a young adult for a decade, while I was growing up over the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, there were still soldiers, shell shock soldiers alive. Did we ever think about them? Did anybody, even listening, ever imagine that there were still veterans of that campaign who were, hidden away in some hostel or some retreat because their brains, had failed them at the end of their lives? No, they sort of vanished from history. And so what I am appalled by is that something of such magnitude could just kind of vanish from the medical landscape. You would have thought that when the war ended, everybody would have been scrabbling to figure out this mystery. But the war came and went. People just wanted to get on, turn a new chapter, and it slipped between the cracks. So what I think we have to be very vigilant about in these campaigns, when memories are even shorter than they used to be, is that 10 years from now, this is still a live issue, that the VA system is set up to be flexible enough that a military, veteran at whatever age, because these symptoms may develop, by the way, late over time. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that, conditions like Parkinson's or dementia may, come on in later years. We need to know that those former personnel can just walk into the system and get whatever kind of treatment is being available at that time and not have to kind of reinvent the wheel or prove their case or anything like that. So I just think while it's a hot issue now is when, the kind of, we just need to make sure that the kind of mechanisms are in place for people to be able to get what they need when people are no longer thinking about this subject.
You have done something, really profound. I hope you realize that. What I'm imagining, Caroline, is that doctors, neurologists, people who actually do brain surgery, et cetera, might actually pick up this article and learn something or have a different view on something that they never thought of it from this angle before.
Well, I think, that we forget history always at our peril. There's as they say, history is prelude. And in this case, my full attention and emotional attention, if you will, is very much on the present situation. But the past does have something to teach. And for example, the only data that we have that would suggest what the long-term fate or long-term condition of many of these injured soldiers might be, the best source of data available are the British Ministry of Pension files after World War I, which at least show who was still getting a pension for a disability from shell shock. And the number over the decades rises. It does not decrease. It goes up. It does not go down. Now, the data is very imperfect. It was not set up for this kind of study, and different governments come into power over the decades, and some have more liberal or more severe, restrictions. So it's by no means, a kind of pure document. But nonetheless, it's the only data we have, and it's enough to pay attention to, and it simply suggests that that what we're seeing today is going to be a slow emerging situation, and people need to be vigilant about it, and they need to be monitoring it. And veterans need the kind of information where they can go to, a website and keep track of what's available, where the state of knowledge is, and be able to possibly self-diagnose, because there's no other means of diagnosing this condition. There is no form of MRI right now, today, that is able to peer into the brain of a living soldier and tell you what the damage is. It's thought to happen at very, very much at a micro tissue level.
And you're doing something wonderful at Walter Reed, and I had looked at some of the photographs that you're actually getting the soldiers themselves involved. They paint masks as to how they're feeling inside, and then you actually took photographs of them wearing the masks and being with their families, and you can see the expression on the faces that each soldier paints, plus the expression on the real faces of their families. This is something that really needs to be paid attention to.
I have all credit for the actual photograph must go to Lynn Johnson, who's a brilliant photographer and specializes in very difficult subjects like this. But the choice that the magazine made for the subjects was this art therapy program, which, as you say, it gives the veterans who've been diagnosed either actually with PTSD, the emotional condition, as well as TBI, the physiological condition. It gives them blank masks that would fit over their face, and they're asked to just paint what they feel like. And what is so striking, and what the magazine has done so well, is just showcase all of these different masks. Some as being worn, as you say, by the men themselves, some just as a kind of portfolio, and all of them are scary. I mean, I think you'd agree with that. None of them are pretty, or none of them are. They are all really the kind of stuff of nightmares. They're locked up. They're demonic. They're angry. They've got death written all over them, and apparently this is just a form of expression that is I guess very intimate. You don't even have to use words to say or express what you're feeling, and so many soldiers have found this to be kind of therapeutic.
And they all seem to have tears in one way or another on the masks themselves, and I think that's what really got to me, was the painting on of the tears.
Yes, yeah. No, they are quite, they're really impactful and disturbing to look at.
Well, it probably goes without saying that many soldiers have both PTSD and PDI. If a soldier, we had a story we had a man in the studio. We have a veteran show on Thursdays, and one of the gentlemen was from a Korean War veteran. His wife came in to talk to us about how her husband did a complete 180-degree turn when he went to get treatment for his PTSD, which he had been living with ever since the Korean War. the interview I'm talking to you about probably was just 2 or 3 years ago, and he got the treatment just like a year before that. So she had married him, lived with him, understood him, and whatever the effects of the PT, however it manifested itself, went away, and it was a very good thing. She said he's a totally different man, and he's so much more enjoyable to be around. He must have been enjoyable to a certain extent because she married him. But I guess the point is that, I guess maybe my question is, I'm not really have a point, but my question would be, this gentleman, and I don't know, but he probably was also exposed to explosives, so he probably had both. Is there any indication that treatment for PTSD just might also help somebody with PDI?
Yes, I mean it's this very muddy nexus because first of all, any traumatic injury generally, if you see it, if you're not knocked unconscious, apparently witnessing the event is part of how PTSD trauma is formed. But whether one's lost a limb, whether there's some dreadful injuries that happen on the battlefield, and all of those would tend to be accompanied by PTSD. But in those cases, they're easy to separate. You can say, here's the loss of a limb on the one hand,
right.
these are the emotional effects on the other. The problem with the traumatic brain injury or the blast-induced neurotrauma, to use the better term, is that they're muddled. Because the brain is the seat of emotions, it's really hard to sort out what's going on. So on the one hand, they probably do both have psychological and actual injury. On the other hand, there is a concern that too many of the what appear to be emotional or even cognitive difficulties are not, in fact, treatable. They're not, strictly speaking, PTSD. They are rooted in a very specific injury to a very specific part of the brain. So the short answer is yes, PTSD should not be overlooked. The treatment will be beneficial if you can disburden any of the symptoms. If one's got multiple symptoms and this therapy at least gets rid of some of them, then so much the better. But when, it's just trying to get to the root cause of everything that's going on.
Caroline, thank you for being on the air with us today. I'm looking at the clock. I want to make sure we don't run out of time before we give information. Although this is National Geographic magazine, it shouldn't be hard to find. But how I guess we can read this obviously with the magazine, just get it at the book stands, the newsstands, wherever. Is there a website also for National Geographic?
Yes, if you even just Google National Geographic magazine, the website would come up, and it's vividly displayed there. Front and center, and there's some wonderful additions. You can hear some of the interviews with a number of the veterans speaking behind the masks that they wear, for example.
Oh, wow. Okay, we'll have to all check it out. Well, thank you for being on there. I didn't even get to ask you how this came to be an assignment of yours. We'll have to ask that another time. But thank you so much for being on the air with us today, Caroline Alexander. Go to nationalgeographic.com. It's the cover story, Healing Soldiers, the Invisible War on the Brain. Caroline, thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was a great interview. We will be right back.